It does not count. She did not ask for my blessing. The scream shattered the elegant quiet of the Michelin-starred restaurant just as Andre slipped the velvet box open. Before I could even gasp, a hand twisted into my braids, yanking my head back so violently my chair tipped over. I hit the floor, staring up at Kendra standing over me. Her chest was heaving, and her mascara was running down her face as she kicked the $15,000 ring across the dining room. But what shocked me more was not the physical assault. It was my fiancé staying on his knees, apologizing to her. I am Maya, 35 years old, and a forensic wealth manager who dismantles offshore shell companies for a living. I should have known better than to ignore the red flags in my own relationship. But love makes you blind to the balance sheets of your own life until someone forces you to audit them. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic people who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Atlanta taught me the value of hard work and boundaries. I built my career from the ground up, turning my sharp eye for numbers into a highly sought-after forensic accounting firm. I was logical, precise, and protective of my peace. Then I met Andre. He was charming, handsome, and heir to a lucrative logistics company. He was also a package deal. Coming with him was his older brother Terrence's white wife Chloe, and the undeniable true matriarch of Andre's life, his lifelong best friend Kendra. From the very beginning, Kendra made it clear that I was merely a guest in Andre's world. She was the golden child of their social circle, the one who dictated their weekend plans, approved their friend group, and somehow managed to live a lifestyle of conspicuous luxury without a clear source of income. Chloe enabled every bit of it, treating Kendra like a celebrity, while treating me like an unfortunate tax penalty they had to endure. I tolerated the subtle disrespect because Andre always promised me I was his priority. He told me Kendra was just overprotective because they had grown up together. I swallowed my pride for the sake of peace, not realizing I was walking into a meticulously laid trap. The night of the proposal was supposed to be our intimate celebration. Andre had reserved a private alcove at one of the finest restaurants in the city. The ambient lighting caught the sparkle of crystal glasses, and the soft murmur of wealthy patrons provided the perfect backdrop for what was supposed to be the most romantic moment of my life. Andre looked incredibly handsome in his tailored suit, holding my hands across the white tablecloth and speaking about our future. He spoke about building a legacy together, about how my strength balanced his spirit. When he slid out of his chair and dropped to one knee, the rest of the restaurant seemed to fade away. He pulled out a velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond. I felt tears of genuine joy prickling my eyes. I was ready to say yes to a lifetime with him. Then the illusion shattered. Kendra appeared out of nowhere, having apparently tracked his location or badgered the reservation details out of his brother. Her arrival was a hurricane of misplaced entitlement. "It does not count," she yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and silencing every patron in the room. She did not ask for my blessing. Before my brain could even process her sudden appearance, her hand was in my hair. The pain was immediate and blinding. She grabbed a fistful of my braids and pulled backward with all her weight. The heavy oak chair I was sitting on tipped backward, launching me onto the hard, polished floor. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs. My shoulder slammed into the ground and my scalp burned with a sharp, searing agony. I lay there for a second, completely stunned by the sheer violence of the moment. I looked up, expecting to see my future husband leaping to my defense, demanding security, throw this woman out, or at least checking to see if I was bleeding. Instead, Andre was still on his knees. But he was not looking at me. He had turned toward Kendra. He was reaching out his hands to her, pleading with her to calm down. "Kendra, you are overreacting. Please just breathe," he told her while she stood over my fallen body, breathing heavily like a victorious gladiator. She kicked the open velvet box, sending the engagement ring skittering across the dining room floor, where it hit a baseboard with a pathetic clink. The commotion brought Terrence and Chloe rushing over from the bar area, where they had apparently been waiting to celebrate the aftermath of the proposal. I expected Terrence to pull Kendra away, or for someone to offer me a hand up. I expected basic human decency. Instead, Chloe knelt down next to Kendra, rubbing her back and glaring at me as if I was the one who had just committed an assault. "Look what you made her do," Chloe snapped at me, her voice full of venom and misplaced self-righteousness. "You know she has severe anxiety about losing Andre to outsiders. You should have been more sensitive to her feelings today of all days. You accepted the proposal way too eagerly without even looking to see if she was comfortable." I remained on the floor, letting the cold tile ground me as I absorbed the absolute insanity of her words. Outsider. Eagerly. Anxiety. They were speaking a language of manipulation so fluent and rehearsed that it could only have been perfected over years of toxic enabling. Terrence stood silently behind his wife, offering no assistance and no intervention. In their twisted hierarchy, Kendra was the undisputed queen whose emotional outbursts dictated the entire family dynamic. Chloe was her loyal lieutenant, eager to secure her own spot in the inner circle by tearing me down. And Andre, my supposed protector, was the passive subject who would rather watch the woman he claimed to love be physically attacked than cause a moment of discomfort for his childhood friend. The picture became crystal clear. This was not a sudden mental health episode. This was a calculated demonstration of power. Kendra needed to prove in front of everyone that she owned Andre. She needed to show me that I could only exist in his life if I remained squarely beneath her shoe. And the entire family was complicit in maintaining that structure. They expected me to cry. They expected me to scream or cause a scene that would finally give them the excuse to label me as the angry, aggressive black woman who did not fit into their refined social circles. They wanted me to lose my temper so they could justify getting rid of me. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I took a deep, steadying breath, shutting away the pain in my scalp and the humiliation burning in my chest. I slowly picked myself up from the floor, dusting off my dress with deliberate, careful movements. I walked past the staring patrons, past a sobbing Kendra and a coddling Chloe, to the edge of the dining room where the ring had landed. I bent down, picked up the diamond, and walked back over to where Andre was still kneeling like a pathetic child. I looked down at him, my expression completely devoid of the love I had felt just 5 minutes earlier. I slipped the ring onto my own finger. "I will wear it." I whispered, my voice so calm and quiet that he had to lean in to hear me. "But you have exactly 1 week to fix this." I turned my back on all of them and walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, projecting the unshakable confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. I did not wait for the valet. I strode directly to my car, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a cold, calculating clarity. I was done making excuses for these people. I was done playing the accommodating partner. As I put the keys in the ignition, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, expecting a desperate text from Andre or a nasty message from Chloe. Instead, the screen displayed an urgent security notification from the private encrypted server I used for my forensic accounting firm. I had set up background financial alerts on Andre's public business accounts months ago, simply as a precaution to help him manage his portfolio. The notification was not a routine update, it was a high-priority alert. Someone had just attempted to authorize a massive wire transfer of $250,000 from Andre's family business trust directly into a newly formed offshore holding company. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. This was not just about a jealous best friend having a dramatic meltdown over a ring. This was about money. They were trying to drain his assets while I was completely distracted by the chaos they had orchestrated. My sadness instantly evaporated, replaced by the thrilling, familiar focus of a predator tracking its prey. They had picked the wrong woman to humiliate. The morning sun was barely breaking over the Atlanta skyline when my phone rang. It was Valerie Andres' mother summoning me to the family estate. She did not ask if I was available. She simply stated that we were having a family meeting at 9 o'clock sharp and hung up. After the alert I received the night before regarding the attempted $250,000 wire transfer from the family business account, I had barely slept. I spent the entire night drinking black coffee and mapping out potential corporate structures on my whiteboard. I showered, put on a tailored neutral suit, and drove to the prestigious Buckhead neighborhood where Valerie held court over the family empire. I needed to see exactly how deep this rot went. The gates of the estate swung open, revealing the massive brick mansion that Andre grew up in. I parked my car behind Chloe's pristine white Range Rover. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my jacket and walked through the front doors. The house was immaculate and suffocatingly quiet. A housekeeper directed me toward the sunroom at the back of the house. I expected to find Andre waiting to apologize to me in private. Instead, I walked straight into a carefully orchestrated ambush. Valerie sat at the head of the long glass table, sipping her morning tea with the posture of a monarch. Chloe sat to her right, scrolling through her phone with a self-satisfied smirk. Andre sat on the opposite side, looking exhausted and refusing to meet my eyes. Kendra was notably absent, playing the delicate victim somewhere else, while her loyal foot soldiers did her dirty work. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, maintaining a perfectly neutral expression. Valerie set her teacup down with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel drop. She looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "Maya." She began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We need to have a very serious conversation about your behavior last night. Your complete lack of grace and understanding caused a severe emotional crisis for someone who is practically a daughter to me." I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. My behavior I repeated evenly. I was under the impression that having my hair violently pulled in public by another grown woman was the actual crisis. Chloe slammed her phone face down on the glass table. "Do not play the victim, Maya," Chloe snapped, leaning forward aggressively. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You know Kendra suffers from severe abandonment anxiety when it comes to Andre. You accepted his proposal way too eagerly, without even pausing to make sure Kendra was comfortable with the transition. You practically rubbed the ring in her face. You triggered her mental health episode on purpose because you are threatened by their bond. The absolute absurdity of a white woman sitting in an Atlanta mansion telling me, an African-American woman, that I accepted a marriage proposal too eagerly and therefore deserved to be physically assaulted, almost made me laugh. Almost. I looked at Andre, waiting for him to defend the woman he had asked to marry him just 12 hours prior. He rubbed his face, looking everywhere but at me. "Maya, please try to see it from their perspective," Andre muttered weakly. "Kendra has been going through a lot lately. She feels like she is losing her best friend. You walking out of the restaurant cold and unbothered just made her panic attack worse. My mother and Chloe think it would be best if we smooth this over quickly before the social circles start talking." I turned my gaze back to Valerie, waiting to hear exactly what smoothing this over entailed. Valerie folded her hands on the table. "We have decided that the only way to repair the damage you caused to Kendra's mental health and to preserve the family peace is for you to issue a public apology. We want you to post a statement on your Instagram account taking accountability for your insensitivity toward Kendra's anxiety. We have already drafted the apology for you. Chloe will text it to you. You just need to copy and paste it along with a picture of the two of you." The demand was so wildly insulting that for a brief moment the logical forensic accountant part of my brain short-circuited. They wanted me to publicly apologize to the woman who assaulted me. They wanted me to humiliate myself before their entire social circle to soothe the ego of an unstable interloper. The old Maya, the woman who demanded respect above all else, wanted to flip the glass table, grab her purse, and walk out of that house and out of Andre's life forever. But then I remembered the notification on my private server. $250,000. That was just the single wire transfer I had managed to catch. If I walked away right now, flipped them off, and cut my ties, I would never know the truth. I would never know why Kendra had so much power, why Chloe was so fiercely loyal to her, and why Andre was so terrified of upsetting them. If I ended the engagement today, they would simply close ranks, lock me out of their systems, and continue draining whatever wealth was left in the family trust. I needed access. I needed time. And in order to buy that time, I needed to play the role of the submissive, accommodating fiancé they desperately wanted me to be. I forced my shoulders to relax. I softened my eyes and let out a slow, perfectly measured sigh. I looked at the table, then looked up at Valerie displaying a masterclass in manufactured humility. "You are right," I said, my voice soft and compliant. I was so caught up in the excitement of the proposal that I completely failed to consider Kendra's feelings. I know how important she is to this family. I never meant to cause her any anxiety or make her feel replaced. The change in the room was instantaneous. The heavy tension evaporated. Chloe's aggressive posture softened into a smug, victorious grin. Valerie nodded approvingly, taking another sip of her tea. Andre let out a massive breath of relief, finally looking at me with what he probably thought was love, but was actually just gratitude that I had made his life easier by abandoning my own self-respect. "I will post the apology as soon as I get home," I promised, standing up from the table. "I want to make sure I get the wording exactly right, so Kendra knows I am sincere. I will clear my schedule today and spend some time reflecting on how I can integrate better into the family dynamic without causing disruptions." Valerie smiled, a chilling maternal smile. "That shows real maturity, Maya. I knew Andre chose a smart girl. Once you post the apology, we can move past this unfortunate little hiccup and start focusing on the wedding planning." I thanked her politely, said goodbye to Andre, and walked out to my car. I did not speed. I did not slam the car door. I drove back to my downtown condominium with the steady, focused calm of a woman going to war. I walked through my front door, kicked off my heels, and went straight to my home office. I locked the door behind me, powered up my encrypted desktop, and pulled up 3 separate monitors. I was a top-tier forensic wealth manager. People paid me exorbitant amounts of money to find hidden assets, uncover corporate fraud, and dismantle complex financial webs created by brilliant criminals. Kendra and Chloe were not brilliant criminals. They were greedy, arrogant amateurs who thought they had just put me in my place. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to the castle to the one person equipped to burn it down. I decided to initiate a quiet pro bono audit of Kendra's entire life. According to her perfectly curated social media presence, Kendra was a successful luxury lifestyle influencer. She drove foreign cars, wore seasonal designer collections, and lived in a high-rise penthouse in Midtown. I started by pulling public records on her primary limited liability company, which she claimed handled her brand sponsorships and marketing deals. It took me less than 30 minutes to crack the first firewall of her poorly secured corporate structure. What I found made my blood run cold. There were no brand deals. There were no legitimate marketing sponsorships. The inbound cash flow funneling into Kendra's corporate accounts was coming from a single recurring source. I traced the routing numbers, cross-referencing them with the financial data I already had access to through my work with Andre's personal portfolios. The money funding Kendra's glamorous existence was being siphoned directly from the family trust account of Andre's logistics company. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being moved under the guise of vague consulting fees and marketing retainers. I dug deeper, pulling the authorization logs for the transfers. Every single transaction moving money from the family business into Kendra's pockets bore the digital signature of one person: Andre. My fiancé was willingly, knowingly draining his own family legacy to fund the lifestyle of the woman who had just assaulted me. And based on the fresh wire transfer alert from last night, they were accelerating the process. The rabbit hole went much deeper than a toxic friendship, and I was going to follow it all the way to the bottom. The numbers on my screens glowed in the quiet room. This was not a love triangle. This was a financial bleed-out. They thought they had secured an obedient, naive wife to sit quietly while they looted the estate. I pulled up the drafted apology Chloe had sent to my phone. I copied it, pasted it to my social media, and posted it with a bright, smiling photo of me and Kendra from a past holiday party. I watched the likes and comments roll in from their social circle praising my maturity and grace. Let them think they had won the battle today. I was currently mapping out the war. I reached for my coffee, my eyes tracking the endless lines of fraudulent transactions. I needed more data. I needed to see exactly how Chloe fit into this parasitic ecosystem, and I needed to know how close Andre's company was to total collapse. The golden best friend and the entitled sister-in-law had severely underestimated the quiet woman in the room. They wanted me to audit my behavior. Instead, I was going to audit their entire existence. I expanded my search parameters beyond Kendra's immediate limited liability company and started running inquiries on Chloe's personal spending accounts. The picture was becoming increasingly clear and deeply disturbing. The sheer volume of wealth being extracted from the business was staggering, and it was all happening right under the nose of a matriarch who thought she was in total control. I sat back in my leather office chair, listening to the quiet hum of my servers processing the data. The engagement ring on my finger felt heavy, a physical reminder of the elaborate lie I was currently living. I would play their game. I would smile at their dinners. I would apologize when demanded. But behind the closed doors of my office, I was building the guillotine they would eventually put their own heads into. The quiet hum of my office felt like the only truthful thing left in my life. I saved the initial findings onto an encrypted offline drive. This was just the first layer of the deception. To truly dismantle their operation, I would need physical access. I would need to get close to Chloe. I would need to let them think they were breaking my spirit while I systematically stripped them of their power. The intervention at the estate was not a defeat. It was my inauguration into their game. And I played to win. The glow of my 3 monitors cast a harsh blue light across my office as midnight turned into the early hours of the morning. I had already cracked the superficial accounts funding Kendra's luxury lifestyle, but my instincts told me that was barely scratching the surface. When you dismantle financial crimes for a living, you learn very quickly that greed is rarely contained to a single pipeline. Parasites like Kendra and Chloe do not just take a little off the top. They drain the host until there is nothing left but a hollow shell. I reached for my coffee, taking a sip of the cold, bitter liquid to keep my mind sharp. I unleashed the full force of my proprietary tracking software, shifting my focus from Kendra directly onto Chloe. Chloe had recently been flaunting a spectacular lifestyle upgrade. She was married to Andres' brother Terrence, who ran the marketing division of the family logistics company. Terrence made a very comfortable salary, but he did not make custom Parisian couture and sudden Aspen vacation home money. Chloe had been parading around our social circle wearing $500,000 in jewelry while treating me like dirt. I needed to see exactly how she was affording her arrogance. I bypassed the standard banking firewalls and tapped into the deeper clearinghouse data. It took me less than 2 hours to find it. Buried beneath layers of corporate obfuscation was a holding company registered in Delaware. The entity was called KC Global Consulting. Kendra and Chloe. The sheer brazen arrogance of using their own initials almost made me laugh. I traced the routing numbers and watched the data populate across my screen. The amount of money flowing into KC Global Consulting was absolutely staggering. It was being categorized in the family business ledger as vendor payments for international marketing and brand expansion. But there was no marketing. There was no brand expansion. They were generating fake invoices for phantom services and authorizing immediate payouts. I tracked the funds as they moved from the Delaware holding company directly into private offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. They were effectively laundering Andre's generational wealth right out from under his entire family. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I dug into the digital authorization logs. A small, naive part of my heart, the part that had genuinely loved Andre, was praying to find forged signatures. I wanted to see that his digital identity had been compromised. I wanted to believe that the man who had proposed to me just 24 hours ago was simply a naive victim of theft. I wanted to believe he was blind but innocent. The data told a different and devastating story. I pulled the dual authentication stamps for every single major wire transfer over the past 18 months. The IP addresses matched Andre's personal secure network. The authentication codes had been sent directly to his private cell phone. He had personally approved every single transfer. He had logged in, looked at the fraudulent invoices from his best friend and his sister-in-law, and actively signed off on his own financial execution. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I pushed my chair back and stared at the ceiling as the reality of my relationship came crashing down. Andre was not a victim. He was fully complicit. He was consciously choosing to sacrifice his grandfather's 40-year-old logistics empire to appease a toxic possessive friendship. And worse, he was using me as a shield. He wanted a stable, respectable African-American woman with a pristine professional reputation to present to his corporate board and his mother. He wanted me to play the role of the perfect wife securing his public image while he allowed Kendra and Chloe to loot the family vault out the back door. He let them pull my hair in public. He let them gaslight me in his mother's sunroom. He let them treat me like a disposable scapegoat because I was nothing to him but a convenient distraction. I felt a cold, dangerous calm wash over my entire body. The tears I had refused to shed at the restaurant were permanently gone. I leaned back toward my monitors and cracked my knuckles. If Andre wanted to play games with forensic accountants, he was about to learn a very painful lesson about liabilities. I widened my search parameters, digging directly into the primary corporate ledger of the logistics company itself. The business had always boasted a flawless credit rating. It owned a massive fleet of commercial trucks and dozens of distribution warehouses across Atlanta and Savannah. But as I scanned the quarterly debt obligations, my software flagged a massive glaring anomaly. 3 months ago, a new line of credit had been opened. It was a shadow loan initiated through a private equity firm notoriously known for predatory lending practices. The principal amount made my breath catch in my throat. $30 million. I immediately pulled the collateral agreements. My eyes scanned the digital documents, moving faster and faster as the horrifying truth revealed itself. Andre had leveraged the absolute core operational assets of the entire business to secure the loan. He had put up the warehouses, the shipping fleets, and the commercial real estate as a guarantee. The interest rate attached to the loan was astronomical. The terms were aggressively hostile, clearly designed by the predatory lenders to trigger an automatic default within 18 months. I tracked the $30 million. It had not been injected back into the logistics company to fund operations or growth. It had been immediately diverted, broken into smaller, untraceable chunks, and systematically routed through that same labyrinth of offshore accounts controlled by Kendra and Chloe. The trap they had built was breathtaking in its cruelty. If the logistics company defaulted on the shadow loan, the private equity firm would legally seize every single physical asset. The company would be instantly liquidated. Hundreds of hard-working employees would lose their jobs. Andre's mother would lose her entire lifestyle and her home. But the true horror was the legal fallout. When a company collapses under those circumstances, the federal government steps in to audit the remains. The authorities would immediately see that $30 million had been siphoned offshore. As the sole executive signatory on the fraudulent loan and the wire transfers, Andre would face a massive federal investigation for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. He would be looking at decades in federal prison. And Kendra and Chloe, they had structured their Delaware holding company as independent third-party consultants. When the federal indictment came down, they would claim they were simply vendors who had been paid for services rendered. They would walk away with millions of dollars safely hidden in the Caymans, completely untouched by the legal carnage. They were going to let Andre take the fall and rot in a federal cell while they lived like queens on his stolen legacy. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my home office ringing in my ears. I looked down at the $15,000 engagement ring sparkling on my left hand. It was not a promise of a future. It was an anchor to a sinking ship. If I married Andre, my own pristine financial reputation, my licenses, and my entire forensic accounting firm would be dragged into a federal investigation. I would be legally bound to a man who was about to be indicted for white-collar crimes. They thought I was just a quiet, accommodating woman who would look the other way to secure a wealthy husband. They thought they could break my spirit and keep me submissive while they destroyed the man I loved. But I was the wrong woman to corner. I did not just know how to read the numbers, I knew how to weaponize them. I powered down my monitors and locked the encrypted drive in my wall safe. I was not going to run away and warn Andre. I was going to stay right here and buy the battlefield right out from under them. 3 months. 90 days of smiling at the woman who assaulted me. 90 days of making pleasant conversation with the sister-in-law who was actively laundering millions of dollars to the Cayman Islands. 90 days of sleeping next to a man who was signing away his family legacy to appease his toxic best friend. It was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I channeled every ounce of my professional discipline into playing the role of the quiet, accommodating bride-to-be. I attended the family dinners. I complimented Valerie's hideous floral arrangements. I nodded along when Terrence gave unsolicited advice about my accounting firm. I was a ghost in my own life gathering data in the shadows. My bridal shower was supposed to be my one sanctuary. I had meticulously planned an elegant, intimate high tea at a historic botanical garden in Midtown Atlanta. I invited my closest sorority sisters, my professional mentors, and the women who had supported my journey. It was meant to be a quiet afternoon of string quartets and genuine connection. But a week before the event, Chloe and Kendra staged a hostile takeover. They informed me that Valerie found the botanical garden too stuffy and that the family had taken the liberty of upgrading the experience. The upgrade turned out to be a neon-lit, velvet-roped VIP section at a loud, tacky nightclub in Buckhead. I arrived wearing a tailored ivory silk dress that completely clashed with the throbbing bass and flashing strobe lights. The guest list had been entirely gutted and replaced. My mentors and sisters were nowhere to be found. Instead, the VIP booth was packed with Kendra's influencer friends and Chloe's country club sycophants. It was a room full of women who viewed me not as a bride, but as a temporary obstacle to their ongoing party. I took my seat on the sticky leather sofa, ordering a sparkling water, while bottle after bottle of premium champagne was delivered to the table. Kendra was the center of attention, wearing a plunging silver dress that looked more appropriate for a bachelorette party in Vegas. Chloe sat beside her, snapping photos and directing the waitstaff with unbearable arrogance. I watched them perform their wealth, knowing exactly which fraudulent offshore accounts were funding the display. Halfway through the night, Kendra demanded a microphone from the DJ booth. The music dipped to a low hum, and the entire VIP section turned their attention to her. She swayed slightly on her designer heels, holding her glass high. To Maya, Kendra announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You are so brave for taking on a man like Andre. We have been best friends since childhood, and let me tell you, he is a handful. I know all his secrets. I know his fears. I know exactly what he needs before he even opens his mouth." She paused, letting the heavy implication hang in the neon-lit air. She locked eyes with me, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Here is to the bride. But we all know who the real woman in his life will always be. The table erupted in cheers. Chloe clapped loudly, shooting me a challenging glare. They were waiting for me to snap. They wanted me to throw my water in Kendra's face, to storm out of the club, to prove their narrative that I was an aggressive, unstable outsider. I did not give them a single inch of satisfaction. I simply raised my glass, smiled warmly, and took a graceful sip. Let them enjoy their cheap victories. I was playing for the entire board. 2 hours later, the waiter approached the table carrying a leather-bound folder. He bypassed Kendra and Chloe, handing the folder directly to me. I opened it and stared at the itemized receipt. $10,000. It was an astronomical tab for a bridal shower I did not want with guests I did not know. Chloe let out a theatrical sigh, patting her designer purse. "Oh, Maya, I am so sorry. Terrence locked my credit card today because of some suspected fraud alert. Can you cover this just for tonight? I promise we will pay you back." Kendra pouted, leaning against the table. "I left my wallet in Andre's car earlier today. You do not mind, do you, Maya? You are always talking about how successful your little firm is." It was a pathetic, transparent power play. They wanted to drain my personal resources, just like they were draining the family trust. They wanted to see me sweat over a $10,000 bill. I did not blink. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my heavy metal black card, dropping it onto the receipt with a satisfying thud. "Happy to treat you, ladies," I said, my voice perfectly smooth. "Consider it an investment in our future." The waiter took the folder and walked away. Chloe and Kendra immediately turned their attention back to the champagne, celebrating their successful extortion. That was all the distraction I needed. Chloe had carelessly left her purse unzipped on the sofa between us. Inside, I could see the distinct shape of the heavy plastic access fob she used to enter the executive floor of the logistics company headquarters. I needed that fob. My digital audits had hit a wall. The final layer of financial evidence, the original signed loan documents, and the raw offshore transfer authorizations were kept on an isolated internal server that could only be accessed from the executive floor. I casually shifted my weight, leaning closer to Chloe's bag, while pretending to check my phone. I slipped my hand into my own pocket and activated the small, highly illegal RFID cloning scanner I had purchased explicitly for this night. I slid my hand out, pressing the scanner directly against the outside fabric of Chloe's purse, right where the fob rested. The device vibrated once silently, confirming it had captured the encrypted radio frequency data. I slipped the scanner back into my pocket, just as the waiter returned with my card. The entire operation took less than 30 seconds. They thought they had robbed me of $10,000. In reality, I had just purchased the keys to their destruction and considered it an absolute bargain. I left the club shortly after leaving them to their manufactured glamour. The drive home was quiet, the rhythmic hum of the highway providing a stark contrast to the pounding bass I had just endured. I parked in the driveway of the beautiful brick home Andre and I shared. The house was supposed to be our sanctuary, our starting line. Now it just felt like another piece of evidence in a massive crime scene. I walked through the front door and found Andre sitting at the kitchen island. He looked terrible. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his posture was slumped under an invisible weight. He was nursing a glass of bourbon, staring blankly at a stack of papers spread across the granite countertop. "How was the shower?" he asked, his voice lacking any genuine enthusiasm. "It was exactly what your family wanted it to be," I replied, setting my keys down. I walked over to the island and glanced at the paperwork. "What is all this?" Andre rubbed his face, avoiding my gaze. "It is just some financial restructuring. My mother is dealing with a minor tax issue from last year. Nothing serious, just a temporary cash flow hiccup. But the lawyers are suggesting we leverage some equity to help clear it up quickly and quietly." He pushed the papers toward me. It was a new mortgage agreement. A massive high-interest loan secured directly against the home we jointly owned. I stared at the documents, the final puzzle piece locking into place with sickening clarity. The parasite had completely drained the host. The $30 million shadow loan against the family business was likely approaching its default trigger. Kendra and Chloe had siphoned all the liquidity offshore, and now Valerie was facing the very real consequences of the missing funds. Instead of admitting the company was bleeding out, they were scrambling to cover the holes with personal debt. And Andre, blindly loyal and utterly manipulated, was trying to serve up my assets on a silver platter. "I need you to co-sign this, Maya," he said, his voice taking on a pleading, desperate tone. "It is just a formality. My name is on the deed, but because we are getting married next month, the bank wants your signature as a guarantor. It will protect the family. It will protect us." I looked at the man I had once planned to build a legacy with. He was asking me to legally bind my pristine financial reputation and my hard-earned wealth to a sinking ship. He was asking me to finance the very people who had assaulted me, humiliated me, and stolen his inheritance. They were coming for my personal assets now. I picked up the pen, rolling it between my fingers. I looked at the signature line where I was supposed to sign away my future. Then I looked up at Andre, flashing him a warm, reassuring smile. "I would love to help, Andre," I said, setting the pen down gently. "But I cannot sign this right now. My credit is temporarily locked. I received an alert about some potential identity theft last week, and my firm advised me to freeze everything until the investigation is clear. It might take a few weeks to sort out. Andre's face fell, a mixture of panic and disappointment washing over his features. But the tax issue is pressing, Maya. I do not know what I am going to tell my mother. I am sure you will figure it out, baby, I said, walking around the island to kiss his cheek. You always do. I left him sitting there drowning in his own manufactured crisis and walked upstairs to my office. The cloned RFID data was burning a hole in my pocket. They thought they could bleed me dry. They thought I was just collateral damage in their grand scheme. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to buy the battlefield. 3 months passed. 90 days of acting the part of the blissful, clueless bride. It took every ounce of my professional discipline to sit across from Andre at the dinner table every night, knowing he had signed away his family legacy to appease his best friend. I attended the Sunday brunches at Valerie's estate. I complimented Chloe's sudden influx of designer handbags, knowing exactly which offshore accounts had paid for them. I smiled politely when Kendra made passive-aggressive remarks about my hair or my clothes. I was a ghost in my own life, existing only to gather data in the shadows. I sat at my desk and pulled the small black scanner from my pocket. The cloned radio frequency data from Chloe's access fob was the master key I needed to breach the final hidden layer of their financial deception. But I could not do it from home. The logistics company's executive servers were air-gapped, meaning they were physically isolated from the external internet to prevent corporate espionage. I needed physical access to the building. The next morning, I told Andre I was going downtown to meet with my fraud department about my locked credit. Instead, I drove straight to his family's corporate headquarters in the industrial sector of Atlanta. I wore a sharp-tailored trench coat and carried a nondescript briefcase, keeping my head down as I bypassed the main reception desk during the morning rush. I took the service elevator to the executive floor, pulling out a blank keycard I had encoded with Chloe's stolen data the night before. I held my breath as I tapped the card against the security scanner. The heavy glass doors beeped once and slid open. I walked directly into the executive suite, making my way to the secure server room. It took me exactly 12 minutes to bypass the physical terminal locks using my administrative bypass tools and plug in my encrypted drive. I downloaded the original signed loan documents, the raw offshore transfer authorizations, and the complete internal ledger of the $30 million shadow loan. I slipped back out of the building, completely undetected. When I returned to my home office and analyzed the raw data, the reality of their situation was even more dire than I had calculated. The shadow loan was just weeks away from a catastrophic default. The private equity firm holding the debt was already preparing the legal paperwork to seize the commercial real estate and liquidate the trucking fleet. Andre had completely destroyed his grandfather's legacy, and Valerie was completely oblivious to the impending doom. I knew I could not just walk away from this wreckage. I had invested 3 years of my life, my emotional energy, and my own capital into building a future with this man. They thought they could use my pristine financial standing as a successful African-American woman to bail out their sinking ship while continuing to disrespect me in public. I refused to be a casualty in their collapse. I needed to control the blast radius and ensure maximum public retribution. I picked up my phone and called the senior partners at my anonymous holding company. I instructed them to initiate immediate contact with the predatory private equity firm holding the logistics company debt. The equity firm was aggressive, but they were also strictly motivated by liquidity. They knew the logistics company was bleeding out, and they were facing a messy, protracted legal battle. I spent 48 hours liquidating a carefully curated portfolio of municipal bonds and high-yield mutual funds I had built over the past decade. It was a massive personal financial risk, but I knew the forensic math was bulletproof. My holding company offered them a clean, immediate exit. We offered to purchase the entire debt portfolio for a flat cash buyout. They took the bait instantly. The legal transfer was executed quietly behind closed doors, shielded by dense layers of non-disclosure agreements and corporate anonymity. I sat at my desk and watched the confirmation emails roll into my secure server. It was a surreal moment of absolute power. I was no longer just the quiet, accommodating fiancé planning a wedding. I was officially the largest debt holder of Andre's family business. I owned the warehouse deeds, I owned the titles to the shipping fleet. If the company defaulted on the shadow loan, they would not be answering to a faceless private equity firm. They would be answering directly to me. I had just purchased their entire generational legacy out from under them, and they had absolutely no idea. With the family business firmly under my control, I turned my attention to the wedding itself. Valerie had insisted on hosting the ceremony and reception at an ultra-exclusive, notoriously old money country club in the northern suburbs of Atlanta. It was the kind of establishment that prided itself on generational wealth and strict social hierarchies. It was an institution that historically would not have allowed a woman who looked like me to walk through the front door unless I was carrying a serving tray. It was also the exact venue Kendra had practically demanded, declaring it the only place suitable for a high society wedding of this caliber. I pulled up the financial disclosures for the country club, expecting to see a fortress of untouchable capital. Instead, my forensic software flagged a massive, glaring discrepancy in their operational ledger. The grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and the sprawling manicured lawns, where we were supposed to take our wedding photos, were all mortgaged to the hilt. Membership had been steadily declining for years, as the older generation aged out, and the board of directors had taken out a series of highly leveraged commercial loans to cover necessary renovations to the golf course and the main clubhouse. The loans were poorly structured, and the club was quietly teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, trying desperately to keep up appearances for its wealthy, influential members. It was the perfect mirror to Andre's own family, a rotting foundation covered in a fresh coat of expensive paint. I saw an opportunity that was simply too poetic to ignore. I reached back out to my holding company attorneys. I instructed them to approach the country club's board of directors with a highly confidential, aggressive restructuring offer. We would assume their outstanding renovation debts and inject immediate operational liquidity into the establishment. In exchange, my holding company would take a controlling ownership stake in the property itself, including the clubhouse, manicured grounds, and commercial deed. The board of directors, terrified of a public bankruptcy scandal and desperate to save their prestigious reputation, agreed to an emergency executive vote. The negotiations moved rapidly over the next few days. I managed all of this while sitting on the couch next to Andre, helping him pick out floral arrangements and reviewing catering menus for the reception. He complained about the stress of the minor tax issue his mother was facing. I played the sympathetic partner perfectly, rubbing his shoulders and telling him the bank needed just a little more time to verify my identity. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the woman sitting next to him was currently purchasing the very ground he planned to stand on. I watched him stress over seating charts and groomsmen gifts while I was reviewing commercial property deeds and asset transfer agreements. The massive disconnect between his manufactured reality and my covert operation was absolutely staggering. By the end of the week, the financial trap was fully constructed and the steel jaws were locked open, waiting for them to step blindly inside. I had secured the toxic debt that would inevitably destroy their family business, and I was finalizing the complete acquisition of the venue where they planned to celebrate their fake triumph. I was no longer just a forensic wealth manager running a pro bono audit on a toxic best friend and an entitled sister-in-law. I was an executioner, meticulously building the scaffold. I packed up my encrypted drives and closed my laptop, feeling a deep, resonant sense of peace wash over me. The anxiety and heartbreak that had threatened to consume me after the restaurant incident had been entirely replaced by a cold, strategic clarity. They wanted to humiliate me in front of their high society friends. They wanted to drain my bank accounts and force me to apologize to the woman who violently assaulted me. I was going to let them put on their white dresses and tailored tuxedos. I was going to let them invite every single wealthy, influential person they knew. I was going to give them the grandest stage imaginable to play out their final performance. But when the curtain fell, I would be the one holding the deed to the theater. I knew they would try to assert their dominance one last time before the wedding day arrived. Chloe had scheduled my final dress fitting at an upscale bridal boutique in the city center, insisting heavily that they both needed to be there to dictate my style choices. I was genuinely looking forward to the appointment and seeing their faces. They fully believed they were walking into a vulnerable setting to put me in my place. One final time, they assumed I was still just the quiet, accommodating, and completely naive fiancé they could easily intimidate, belittle, and ultimately control. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into the meticulously calculated path of a woman who now silently owned their entire financial world forever. The ride home from the upscale bridal boutique felt like a quiet victory march. I sat in the driver's seat of my car looking at the secure confirmation email from my attorneys. I was officially the owner of the pristine historic country club, where my own wedding was scheduled to take place in exactly 7 days. I had secured the very ground they planned to stand on, but my profession had taught me that the final week before a major deadline is always when the most desperate moves are made. I knew Kendra and Chloe would not simply rest after the dress fitting. My calm defiance in the mirror had rattled Kendra deeply. Predators panic when their prey stops running, and I could feel their panic radiating through my fiancé. Over the next few days, I noticed a distinct and disturbing shift in Andre's behavior. He was jumpy and completely unable to hold eye contact with me. He spent hours pacing in our backyard, taking hushed phone calls that ended abruptly the very moment I walked outside. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was the exact same anxious, frantic energy he displayed when authorizing those fraudulent offshore wire transfers for his best friend. Kendra and Chloe were tightening the leash, pulling him into private meetings and filling his head with manufactured paranoia. They realized they could not break my spirit through public humiliation at the bridal shower or intimidate me at the boutique, so they were moving to their final strategic safeguard. They needed to make sure that when they eventually forced Andre to divorce me, I would walk away completely empty-handed. The ambush happened on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 week before we were supposed to walk down the aisle. I had spent the entire afternoon at my firm, finalizing the complex restructuring of Andre's family debt portfolios, which I now secretly controlled. When I arrived at the beautiful brick house we shared, the dining room table was set. Andre had ordered expensive takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant and lit several candles around the room. To an outside observer, it would look like a romantic gesture from a loving fiancé eager to celebrate our upcoming nuptials. But my trained forensic eye picked up the anomalies immediately. His shoulders were incredibly stiff. He was sweating slightly despite the cool air conditioning humming through the house. And a thick manila envelope rested on the edge of the granite kitchen island, completely out of place among the crystal wine glasses and porcelain pasta dishes. We sat down to eat, and the silence between us was absolutely deafening. He pushed his food around his plate, avoiding my gaze while taking larger sips of wine than usual. I waited patiently, cutting my food with deliberate precision. In my line of work, you learn that the guilty party will always fill the silence if you give them enough rope. Finally, Andre cleared his throat, reaching for his glass with trembling fingers. Maya. He began, his voice lacking any of its usual confident resonance. We need to talk about the future. We are merging our lives, and with the family business facing some minor temporary transitions, my mother and I have been discussing how to best protect everyone involved. I set my silver fork down, wiping my mouth with a linen napkin. The phrasing was so perfectly sterile and so legally curated that I instantly knew the words did not belong to him. Minor temporary transitions. That was Chloe's country club vocabulary, masking the fact that the company was bleeding out. Protect everyone involved. That was Kendra's possessive, controlling grip over his autonomy. Andre stood up from the table, walked over to the kitchen island, and brought the thick manila envelope back to the dining area. He slid it across the polished wood until it touched the edge of my plate. It is a prenuptial agreement, he said, refusing to look me in the eye as he took his seat. I know the timing is terrible with the wedding only a week away, but my family feels very strongly about this. Terrence and Chloe signed one before they got married. It is just standard procedure to protect the generational legacy. I looked down at the bland envelope and then back up at the man I had once planned to build a family with. A prenuptial agreement, I repeated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. Andre, we have been engaged for months. We have already merged our daily household finances. Why is this suddenly a mandatory requirement 7 days before the ceremony? Andre shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting toward his phone, which sat face up on the table as if he was actively waiting for further instructions from his handlers. It is just that things have been very tense lately, Maya. Between you and Kendra and between you and my mother. The family is just feeling a little protective of the estate right now. Kendra pointed out that your accounting firm is doing well, but you do not come from the same kind of background we do. They just want to make sure your intentions are pure. They want to know you are marrying me for me and not for the family wealth. They want to ensure you are not a gold digger. The phrase hit the air like a physical blow. Gold digger. The absolute unmitigated audacity of this man was staggering. He was sitting in a home that I helped furnish, eating expensive food paid for by my corporate credit card, while actively allowing his best friend and his white sister-in-law to launder his actual inheritance to the Cayman Islands. He was completely mathematically broke. His family business was mere hours away from a catastrophic default. The prestigious country club they prized so highly was now legally my property. And he was sitting there calling an independent, self-made African-American woman a gold digger because a parasite told him to do it. As a forensic wealth manager, I have sat across from notorious embezzlers, pathological liars, and ruthless corporate thieves. I have seen the darkest, most manipulative parts of human greed. But looking at Andre in that moment, I felt a profound, sickening disgust that no corporate audit could ever prepare me for. The man I loved was dead. In his place sat a hollow puppet regurgitating the poisonous insecurities of two women who were actively destroying his life. They had successfully convinced him that I was the ultimate threat. They had manufactured an emotional crisis to blind him to their own massive financial theft. I kept my hands resting lightly on the dining table, making sure my body language betrayed nothing. Are you telling me, Andre, that you believe I am marrying you for your money? I asked, my tone carrying a dangerous quietness that he was too foolish to recognize. Are you telling me that after all the time we have spent together building a life, you need a legal contract to prove my intentions are genuine? He swallowed hard, looking utterly miserable but entirely unwilling to stand up for our relationship. I do not think that, Maya, he pleaded, leaning forward slightly. But you know how Kendra gets. She has terrible anxiety about my future, and she worries about people taking advantage of me. She and Chloe just want to make sure the logistics business is insulated from any potential marital disputes. If you just sign the document, it will prove to them that you are committed to our relationship, and not the assets. It will smooth everything over for the wedding day so Kendra can relax. Please just read it and sign it so we can move past this drama. I looked at the thick manila envelope resting against my plate. Inside that paper casing lay the ultimate trap they had designed to ruin me. I knew exactly what their lawyers had drafted without even opening it. They had drafted a document specifically designed to strip me of any marital rights and to leave me with absolutely nothing when Kendra eventually convinced Andre to file for divorce. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner where I had to either sign away my dignity or cancel the wedding and face devastating public humiliation. They truly thought they were holding all the winning cards. I reached out and rested my hand gently on the envelope. I did not throw it back at his face. I did not scream or cry. I did not defend my honor or list my own extensive professional accomplishments. I simply offered him a soft, accommodating smile that completely masked the absolute zero temperature of my heart. If this is what you and your family need to feel secure, Andre, I said, my voice smooth and comforting, then of course I will review it. I understand that protecting the legacy is important. I will take it upstairs to my office tonight and look it over. I picked up the envelope and pushed my chair back from the table, leaving my dinner completely uneaten. I walked up the stairs feeling the heavy weight of the legal document in my hands. I stepped into my home office and locked the solid wood door firmly behind me. I tossed the envelope onto my glass desk next to my encrypted server monitors. I fought back a sudden wave of physical nausea brought on by the sheer pathetic weakness of the man sitting downstairs. But the grief was fleeting. It was immediately replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of my profession. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down in my leather executive chair, and slid the thick contract out of the envelope. I prepared to review the legal trap they falsely believed they had set for me, completely unaware that they were handing a loaded weapon directly to their executioner. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my home office, listening to the soft hum of my encrypted servers. The thick manila envelope rested on the cool glass surface of my desk. Inside was the pre-nuptial agreement that Andre had awkwardly pushed across the dining room table just an hour earlier. I picked up my silver letter opener and sliced through the thick paper flap with a smooth, deliberate motion. I pulled out the towering stack of legal documents. The pages were printed on expensive, heavy bond paper bearing the watermark of a highly aggressive corporate law firm located in downtown Atlanta. I knew this firm. They catered almost exclusively to old money families who wanted to ensure their wealth remained perfectly insulated from outsiders. Chloe and Kendra had clearly spared no expense in hiring the most ruthless attorneys they could find to orchestrate my financial execution. I turned on my brass desk lamp, bathing the room in a warm, focused light. I picked up my red pen and began to read the contract with the meticulous clinical precision of a seasoned forensic wealth manager. The initial pages were exactly what I expected. The clauses were brutal and unforgiving. They were designed to strip me of any potential claim to marital property. They explicitly waived any right to spousal support, regardless of the duration of the marriage. There was a particularly vindictive clause requiring me to vacate our shared primary residence within 30 days of a divorce filing and to surrender any equity I had contributed to the mortgage. They wanted to ensure that when Kendra eventually commanded Andre to leave me, I would be thrown out into the street completely destitute and publicly humiliated. They had crafted a legal document meant to break my spirit and leave me entirely dependent on their manufactured mercy. I continued reading, turning page after page of aggressive legal jargon. But then I reached the fourth section of the document, the section titled Pre-Existing Corporate Entities and Asset Protection. I leaned forward in my leather chair, my eyes scanning the dense paragraphs. The attorneys acting on the arrogant instructions of Chloe and Kendra had made a massive, catastrophic calculation error. They operated under the deeply flawed assumption that I was simply a moderately successful accountant with a small local firm. They assumed that Andre held all the real power and all the generational wealth. Therefore, they had instructed their lawyers to draft an incredibly broad, ironclad sweeping clause that permanently protected any and all pre-existing holding companies, limited liability corporations, and acquired financial portfolios established prior to the official date of our marriage. They wanted to build an impenetrable titanium fortress around Andres Logistics Company and his family trust so that I could never touch a single dime of it. I read the clause a second time and then a third time to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. A slow, genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest, echoing in the silent room. The sheer, staggering hubris of these women had just handed me the ultimate shield. Because my anonymous holding company had quietly purchased the $30 million shadow loan that was suffocating Andres' business, these predatory legal clauses now applied directly to me. Because my private entity had successfully acquired the commercial deed to the prestigious country club where our wedding was scheduled to take place, those massive assets were legally classified as my pre-existing corporate holdings. This incredibly aggressive prenuptial agreement, designed to leave me with nothing, actually made my newly acquired billions completely and legally untouchable. But the absolute fatal flaw of the document lay in the liability subsection. To further protect the family estate, the lawyers had explicitly stated that any corporate debts, financial defaults, or federal tax obligations incurred by pre-existing entities would remain the sole individual responsibility of the original owner. The marital estate would bear no burden for past business failures. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, as the magnificent reality of this legal trap washed over me. When Andres' logistics company inevitably defaulted on the shadow loan and collapsed into ruin, he would personally absorb 100% of the bankruptcy. When the federal authorities began investigating the missing millions funneled into offshore accounts by Kendra and Chloe, Andre would bear the entire weight of the criminal liability. Because of this beautifully drafted prenuptial agreement, neither his creditors nor the federal government could ever attempt to seize my assets or drag my pristine accounting firm into the wreckage. They had tried to dig a grave for me, but they had meticulously constructed a bomb shelter to protect me from their own incoming explosion. I placed my red pen back on the desk. I did not need to make a single alteration to the document. It was a masterpiece of accidental self-destruction. I placed the contract back into the manila envelope and turned off my desk lamp. I went to sleep that night feeling more rested and deeply at peace than I had in months. I slept with the profound tranquility of a woman who knows she has already won the war. The next morning I woke up early as the Georgia sun began to filter through the bedroom blinds. I took a long, hot shower, washing away the residual tension of the previous evening. I dressed carefully, choosing a soft cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored trousers, projecting the image of a comfortable, trusting partner. I walked down the curved wooden staircase, holding the manila envelope lightly in my hand. I found Andre in the kitchen, leaning heavily against the granite island. He was nursing a cup of black coffee and staring out the window at the manicured backyard. His shoulders were incredibly tense. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad, waiting for the inevitable fight to begin. He expected tears. He expected me to scream at him about the unfairness of the contract. He expected me to pack my bags and threaten to cancel the wedding. He braced himself as he heard my footsteps enter the room, turning to face me with a look of pure misery. I did not give him the fight he was so desperate to lose. I walked straight up to him, closing the distance between us. I offered him a bright, warm, and entirely loving smile. I reached out and gently placed the manila envelope on the counter next to his coffee mug. I read it through last night, Andre, I said, my voice soft and accommodating. I want you to know that I completely understand. Protecting your family legacy is important, and I never want you or your mother to worry about my intentions. I am marrying you because I love you, not because of your assets. I signed every page exactly where the lawyers indicated. I want us to start our marriage with absolute trust and peace of mind. The physical transformation that washed over his body was almost tragic to witness. All the manufactured anxiety, all the toxic paranoia that Kendra and Chloe had pumped into his head instantly evaporated. A massive wave of relief flooded his features. He let out a long, shaky breath and pulled me into a tight embrace, burying his face in my shoulder. "Oh, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you for understanding. You are incredible. You are the perfect partner. I promise I will make this up to you. Everything is going to be wonderful now." I wrapped my arms around his waist, hugging him back, while staring blankly at the kitchen wall over his shoulder. "You have no idea how wonderful it is going to be," I replied, keeping my tone light and reassuring. I stepped back, gave him one last affectionate kiss on the cheek, and told him I needed to head to my firm for a busy morning of client meetings. I left him standing in the kitchen, clutching the signed instrument of his own absolute ruin, with a look of pure joy on his face. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in my glass-walled downtown office, finalizing the logistical details for the country club acquisition. My phone, resting face up on my desk, buzzed with a sudden notification. I glanced at the screen, expecting a routine update from my legal team. Instead, I saw a message preview from the large family group chat. It was a chat thread Valerie had created months ago to coordinate wedding events. I rarely participated in it, but I kept notifications on to monitor their movements. The message was from Chloe. She had clearly been typing rapidly and carelessly, failing to realize she was sending the text to the main family channel instead of her private, secure thread with Kendra. The message read in its entirety, "The idiot actually signed it without changing a single word. The prenup is fully executed. We have total clearance. We drained the rest of the operational accounts on Friday before the ceremony. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the text twice to ensure I was fully comprehending the sheer magnitude of her arrogance and stupidity. She had just documented her intent to commit massive corporate theft in writing and transmitted it across a digital cellular network. I did not panic. I did not reply to the group chat. I picked up my phone and immediately took 3 high-resolution screenshots of the message, ensuring the timestamps and sender data were clearly visible. I opened my encrypted desktop server and pulled up a secure communication portal. As a top-tier forensic wealth manager who routinely uncovered international fraud, I had direct professional contacts within several federal agencies. I drafted a concise, highly technical email directed to a senior investigator I knew personally at the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I attached the screenshots of Chloe's text message. I attached the complete routing numbers for the offshore Cayman Island accounts. I attached the forged vendor invoices generated by their Delaware holding company. And I attached the digital authorization logs proving the systematic bleeding of the logistics company trust. I hit send and watched the progress bar quickly fill the screen before disappearing. The message was delivered. The evidence was in federal hands. I sat back in my chair, interlacing my fingers as I looked out over the sprawling city. Chloe and Kendra thought they were going to drain the accounts on Friday and celebrate their victory. They had no idea Friday was going to bring a federal storm they could never outrun. The trap was completely locked, and I was holding the only key. The rehearsal dinner was held in the grand dining room of a historic downtown Atlanta hotel. 200 of the most influential people in the city were gathered under vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. I wore a stunning emerald green gown that contrasted perfectly with the elaborate white floral centerpieces Valerie had insisted upon. On the surface, it looked like the perfect celebration of 2 prominent families merging. But I sat at the head table with the profound calm of a predator, watching her prey walk willingly into a cage. Andre sat beside me, completely oblivious to the fact that the prenuptial agreement he had so happily received was actually his financial death warrant. Chloe and Kendra were holding court at the opposite end of the table, drinking top-shelf champagne and casting smug glances in my direction. They thought tomorrow was going to be my ultimate humiliation. They thought they had successfully walled me off from the family fortune. Dinner concluded and the waitstaff began pouring coffee and serving delicate gold leaf desserts. This was the scheduled time for the traditional family toasts. Terrence went first, delivering a generic speech about brotherhood that sounded like it had been copied directly from a corporate greeting card. Then Chloe and Kendra stood up together. They commanded the room, waving to the audiovisual technician at the back of the hall. The ambient lights dimmed and a massive digital projector screen lowered from the ceiling. Chloe took the microphone, flashing a brilliantly fake smile at the crowd. "We wanted to do something a little different tonight," she announced, her voice echoing through the silent room. "When 2 people marry, it is not just about the couple, it is about the history that brought them there. We put together a small tribute to celebrate the real love story that made Andre the man he is today." The music swelled over the speakers, a deeply emotional acoustic track. The slideshow began to play on the massive screen. I sat perfectly still as image after image flashed before the 200 guests. There were childhood photos of Andre and Kendra playing in the mud, teenage photos of them going to high school dances together, college graduation pictures with their arms wrapped tightly around each other, vacation photos from their 20s where they looked exactly like a deeply in love couple. The presentation went on for 10 agonizing minutes. Out of over 100 photographs displayed to the entire room, I was not in a single one. They had completely and deliberately erased me from my own rehearsal dinner. The subtext was blindingly obvious to every single person in the room. I was just a temporary placeholder while Kendra was the permanent fixture. As the final slide faded to black, leaving an image of Kendra kissing Andre's cheek, Chloe and Kendra laughed softly into the microphone. "Andre has always been the heart of our group," Kendra said, dabbing a manufactured tear from her eye. "And Maya, we know you are a quiet girl who likes her spreadsheets and her little routines. You do not talk much, and you definitely do not understand our history. But do not worry. I will always be right here to make sure Andre gets exactly what he needs." A few of their country club friends chuckled. The rest of the room shifted in uncomfortable silence. People stole nervous glances at me, expecting me to break down crying or storm out of the hall. Andre looked terrified, but he said absolutely nothing. He just stared at his empty dessert plate, proving for the 1,000th time that he would never protect me. I did not cry. I did not look embarrassed. I waited for the laughter to die down completely. Then I slowly stood up from my chair. I picked up my champagne flute and tapped it with my silver spoon. The ringing sound cut through the heavy tension in the room. Every eye turned to me. I walked to the center of the head table, my emerald gown sweeping elegantly across the polished hardwood floor. I did not take the microphone from Kendra. I simply projected my voice, relying on the natural acoustics of the room and the absolute unshakable confidence I had built over 35 years of surviving spaces, just like this one. That was a beautiful presentation. I began, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying a warm, resonant tone. It is so important to look back at history to truly understand the present. In my line of work as a forensic wealth manager, I spend a lot of time looking at history. I spend my days auditing lives. I look at decades of financial history to find the truth hidden beneath the surface. The room was dead silent. I could see prominent business owners and corporate executives leaning in, intrigued by my composure. Chloe and Kendra stood frozen, their smug smiles beginning to falter slightly as they realized I was not playing the role of the humiliated victim. When you conduct a thorough audit, I continued pacing slowly behind the chairs of my future in-laws, you inevitably find things that do not belong. You find bad investments. You find depreciating assets. You find liabilities that are actively draining the health of the host. And the most important part of any successful audit is having the courage to ruthlessly cut out those liabilities before they destroy the entire portfolio. I stopped pacing and stood directly behind Andre's chair, placing one hand lightly on his shoulder. He flinched slightly under my touch. Marriage is the ultimate merger, I said, looking out at the crowd. It requires total transparency. It requires eliminating toxic debts and severing ties with entities that no longer serve a profitable future. Over the past few months, I have conducted a very deep and very thorough audit of my future life, and I have made some necessary adjustments to ensure my legacy is perfectly protected. I walked to my seat and picked up a beautifully wrapped gift box tied with a silver silk ribbon. I carried it over to where Kendra and Chloe were standing. Chloe took a cautious step backward, but Kendra held her ground, lifting her chin. She thought I was trying to save face with a pathetic public peace offering. Kendra, I said, holding the box out to her, you have been such a massive part of Andre's past. You have taken so much from this family over the years. I wanted to give you something tonight to commemorate exactly where you stand in my future. Kendra snatched the box from my hands, flashing a triumphant smirk at the audience. She untied the ribbon and tore away the premium wrapping paper, expecting to find a piece of jewelry or a sentimental trinket meant to beg for her approval. She lifted the lid of the box. There was no jewelry inside. There was only a single sharply folded piece of heavy legal paper. Kendra pulled the paper out and unfolded it. I watched her eyes scan the bold black text at the top of the page. It took her exactly 3 seconds to comprehend what she was holding. All the color instantly drained from her face. Her hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled in the quiet room. Her jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. She was holding a formal, expedited notice of foreclosure and immediate property seizure. The document detailed the complete default of her luxury high-rise penthouse. The penthouse that was funded entirely by the offshore money she had been stealing from Andre's family trust. But the most important part of the document was the signature at the bottom. The foreclosure notice was officially executed and signed by the anonymous holding company that now legally owned her debt. My holding company. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with absolute sheer terror. The manufactured influencer, the untouchable golden best friend, had just realized she was completely and legally homeless. The safety net she thought she had stolen had vanished. She was staring at the woman who now owned the roof over her head. I leaned in close so only she and Chloe could hear me. I dropped my voice to a whisper that was colder than ice. I told you to fix it in a week, I whispered, looking dead into her terrified eyes. You chose to play games instead. Pack your bags, sweetie. You have 48 hours before my private security team throws your designer clothes onto the sidewalk. I stood back up, gave her a slow, deliberate wink, and turned my back on her. I walked calmly back to my seat, picked up my champagne flute, and took a sip. I sat down next to my silent, trembling fiancé, projecting the picture of a perfectly happy bride ready for her wedding day. Tomorrow morning, I will burn their entire empire to ash. The morning of my wedding arrived with a crisp, clear sky that felt entirely too optimistic for the destruction I was about to unleash. I sat in the center of the sprawling bridal suite at the country club wearing a silk robe, while a makeup artist meticulously applied my foundation. The suite was a sanctuary of soft lighting and nervous energy, but my pulse was remarkably steady. I had slept perfectly the night prior. The foreclosure notice I handed Kendra had set the wheels in motion, but today was about dropping the final blade. I was just reviewing my mental checklist when the heavy oak doors of the suite swung open without a knock. Chloe strode into the room holding a mimosa, followed immediately by Kendra. I looked at the mirror, assessing the reflection of the woman standing behind me, and for a fleeting second, I actually questioned my own eyesight. Kendra was not wearing a bridesmaid dress. She was not wearing a neutral evening gown. Kendra was wearing a literal floor-length white lace wedding gown. It featured a sweetheart neckline, a sweeping train, and pearl embellishments that rivaled my own custom dress hanging in the corner. She looked like a bride stepping out of a bridal magazine. The makeup artist froze, holding a blending brush in midair, her jaw dropping slightly. The silence in the room was heavy enough to suffocate a person. Kendra smoothed the lace on her bodice, offering me a wide, innocent smile that completely failed to reach her cold, frantic eyes. She was desperate to regain the upper hand after the absolute terror I had inflicted upon her the night before. "Oh, Maya, please do not be upset," Kendra said, her voice dripping with artificial apology. "My designer completely messed up the dye job on my maid of honor dress. It was supposed to be a soft champagne, but the fabric took the color poorly and turned out completely white. The tailor made a massive mistake, and this was the only backup dress I had in my closet that fit the formal dress code. You understand, right?" Chloe let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, taking a sip of her mimosa. "It is just a color, Maya." Chloe chimed in, waving her hand carelessly. "Do not turn into a bridezilla over a piece of fabric. Kendra is already stressed out enough today. Just deal with it and focus on your own outfit." They stood there waiting for the explosion. They wanted me to scream at them to demand Kendra change clothes to throw a tantrum that would justify their narrative of me being an aggressive, unstable, and unreasonable woman. They wanted to ruin my morning by forcing me into a humiliating confrontation over a white dress. But they failed to realize that you cannot ruin a wedding for a bride who has absolutely no intention of getting married. I did not raise my voice. I did not glare at them. I simply smiled at Kendra through the reflection in the mirror, maintaining unbroken eye contact. "You look absolutely beautiful, Kendra," I said, my tone perfectly warm and accommodating. "It is a stunning dress. You should definitely wear it down the aisle today. I want you to feel completely like yourself." Kendra's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had brought a weapon to a battle I was not even fighting. Chloe looked slightly disappointed that she would not get to witness a screaming match, but she quickly recovered and dragged Kendra over to the plush seating area to drink champagne. 10 minutes later, my private cell phone vibrated on the vanity table. The caller identification showed Andre's name. I asked the makeup artist for a brief moment of privacy and picked up the device. Maya, Andre whispered, his voice frantic and hushed, as if he was hiding in a closet down the hall. "Listen, I need to ask you a massive favor. Chloe just texted me and told me about the issue with Kendra's dress. I know she is wearing white, and I know it is wildly inappropriate, but please, Maya, I am begging you not to make a scene about it." I held the phone to my ear, listening to the desperate pleading of the man I used to love. Andre continued rambling, his words tumbling over each other. "Kendra is in a highly fragile state today. Whatever you gave to her last night at the rehearsal dinner really messed with her head. She was crying all morning and saying she feels entirely displaced. If you yell at her about this white dress, it might push her over the edge and she might refuse to stand at the altar with me. Just let her have this one thing, Maya. Please, be the bigger person for me. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. Any lingering trace of empathy, any microscopic fragment of love or hesitation I had left for Andre completely dissolved into nothingness. He knew his best friend was wearing a wedding dress to our ceremony. He knew it was a blatant, profound sign of disrespect. Yet his only concern was protecting her fragile emotional state from my hypothetical anger. He was asking his bride to swallow the ultimate humiliation just to keep his parasite comfortable. The absolute pathetic weakness of his character was staggering. The man was not a victim. He was a willing, eager participant in his own degradation. "You do not need to worry about a thing, Andre," I replied, my voice soothing and gentle. "I already told Kendra she looks beautiful. I want her standing right up there next to you at the altar. I am not going to cause a scene about a dress. Today is going to be unforgettable." "Oh, thank God." Andre breathed a massive sigh of relief echoing through the receiver. "You are amazing, Maya. I love you so much. I will see you at the altar." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the vanity. I did not love him back. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. The time for playing the accommodating partner was officially over. It was time to close the trap. I turned around to face the crowded bridal suite. Chloe and Kendra were laughing loudly on the sofa while the styling team unpacked their equipment. "Ladies," I announced, projecting my voice clearly across the room, "I need to ask a small favor. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by the gravity of the day, and I would like to have 30 minutes of complete silence in the suite. I need to spend some time in solitary prayer before I put my gown on. If you could all wait in the adjoining lounge, I would greatly appreciate it." Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "Whatever, Maya," she muttered, grabbing her champagne glass. "Let us go, Kendra. The bride needs to pray for patience or whatever." Kendra smirked at me, smoothing the skirt of her white wedding gown as she stood up. "Do not take too long, sweetie," she said condescendingly. "Andre is waiting for me." I smiled politely and watched as the stylists, the assistants, and my two antagonists filed out of the room. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them. I immediately walked over and turned the brass deadbolt, locking the doors securely. The suite was completely silent. I walked over to my leather overnight bag tucked discreetly in the corner of the room. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out my heavily encrypted forensic laptop. I carried it to the vanity table, pushing aside the expensive makeup palettes and curling irons to make room. I opened the screen and typed in my complex alphanumeric passcodes, bypassing 3 separate layers of biometric security. The dark interface of my private holding company portal illuminated my face. I opened my direct connections to the banking institutions holding the debt portfolios of Andres' family logistics company. The $30 million shadow loan was technically due for a routine collateral check, but because I owned the debt, I had the authority to trigger an immediate default based on the fraudulent offshore activity I had already documented and submitted to the federal authorities. I opened a second window connecting directly to the executive servers I had compromised with Chloe's cloned key fob. I verified that the final massive wire transfers Chloe and Kendra had scheduled to drain the operational accounts were currently sitting in a pending status, waiting for the automated clearinghouse to open. They thought the money was going to quietly slip into the Cayman Islands while I was walking down the aisle. My fingers moved across the keyboard with absolute precision. I did not feel a single tremor of doubt. I executed the digital command to freeze all outbound capital from the logistics company, blocking their pending wire transfers permanently. Then I clicked over to the holding company portal. I authorized the immediate default on the shadow loan, filing the electronic legal seizure of the commercial real estate, the warehouses, and the shipping fleets. A prompt appeared on the screen asking me to confirm the irreversible financial actions. I stared at the prompt, thinking about the physical pain of Kendra pulling my hair, the gaslighting intervention with Valerie, the $10,000 club bill, and the pathetic phone call from Andre, begging me to tolerate his best friend wearing a wedding gown. I hit enter. The progress bars appeared on my screen. I watched them fill with a bright green color. 10%, 40%, 70%. The digital commands were racing through the secure financial networks, locking accounts, seizing assets, and executing the most devastating corporate takeover in Atlanta history. 100%. The screen flashed a confirmation message indicating all assets were successfully seized and the accounts were permanently frozen. The financial trap was fully armed and securely locked. Kendra, Chloe, Valerie, and Andre were completely, utterly, and irreversibly bankrupt. They just did not know it yet. I closed my laptop and slid it safely back into my leather bag. I stood up and walked over to the full-length mirror. I ran my hands down the sides of my silk robe, taking a deep, cleansing breath. I felt incredibly light. I unzipped the garment bag hanging in the corner and pulled out my custom wedding gown. It was time to get dressed. I took one final look around the lavish bridal suite, savoring the absolute quiet before the storm. The ultimate execution was officially underway. It was time to walk down the aisle and let them discover exactly who was holding the deed to their entire lives. The afternoon sun poured through the massive stained glass windows of the country club, casting a warm golden glow across the meticulously arranged rows of mahogany chairs. The string quartet, positioned elegantly on the manicured lawn outside, began to play a traditional processional melody. It was the exact piece of classical music Valerie had aggressively insisted upon, declaring it the only acceptable choice for a family of their prestigious social standing. I stood in the grand foyer, hidden from the view of the 200 guests, waiting for the heavy oak doors to swing open. A typical bride standing in this exact spot would be feeling a mixture of profound joy and nervous anticipation. Her heart would be fluttering with the promise of a beautiful future and a lifelong partnership. My heart was beating with the slow, rhythmic precision of a ticking clock counting down to absolute zero. I looked down at my custom ivory gown. It was a masterpiece of tailored silk and delicate beadwork, fitting my body with flawless perfection. I had paid for it myself, just as I had paid for everything else in my life. The venue coordinator, a woman who had previously treated me with barely concealed condescension during our planning meetings, now hovered nervously, adjusting the train of my dress with shaking hands. She had received a highly confidential executive memo from the board of directors that morning, informing her of the sudden change in commercial property ownership. She knew exactly who I was, and her sudden deferential panic was the perfect appetizer for the feast I was about to consume. The music swelled, reaching its emotional crescendo. The heavy oak doors swung open, operated by two white-gloved attendants. The entire congregation stood up in unison, turning to face the back of the hall. I stepped over the threshold and began my walk down the long white aisle. I did not rush. I did not cast my eyes downward in bashful modesty. I kept my head held high, projecting the calm, unshakable confidence of a woman who holds every single winning card in the deck. I walked with the deliberate, measured cadence of an absolute monarch, surveying her newly acquired kingdom. Every step I took was a physical reminder that I legally owned the hardwood floors beneath my satin heels. I owned the vaulted ceilings towering above us. I owned the manicured golf course stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. They thought I was walking into their exclusive, impenetrable world. They had absolutely no idea they were sitting as trespassing guests inside my personal fortress. As I moved gracefully down the aisle, I allowed my gaze to sweep across the audience. The pews were packed with the elite upper echelon of Atlanta society. I saw powerful corporate executives, wealthy real estate developers, and generational socialites. These were the people Valerie and Chloe had paraded in front of me for months, using their presence to remind me of my supposed inferiority. These were the people who had politely ignored my professional accomplishments because my background did not feature the requisite trust funds and legacy memberships. They had looked down on my forensic accounting firm as cute but ultimately pedestrian. They were here to witness what they believed to be a strategic acquisition by a powerful dynasty. They thought Andre was doing me an incredible favor by elevating my social status and bestowing his family name upon me. I looked at Valerie sitting proudly in the front row. She wore a tailored silver designer suit, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing the role of the emotional mother of the groom flawlessly. She caught my eye and offered a tight, patronizing smile. She fully believed her financial problems were permanently solved. She believed the predatory shadow loan threatening to liquidate her lifestyle was safely hidden, and that the brutal prenuptial agreement I signed had perfectly insulated her wealth from my reach. I returned her smile with a warm, radiant expression of my own, keeping my face entirely serene. Let her enjoy these final few moments of manufactured peace. Let them all enjoy the beautiful floral arrangements and the expensive champagne waiting at the reception. I wanted them to feel completely and utterly secure before I pulled the floor out from under them. I reached the end of the aisle and stepped up onto the elevated altar platform. Andre stepped forward to take my hands. His palms were clammy and his eyes were wide with a mixture of overwhelming relief and shallow manufactured love. He looked at me as if I was his ultimate salvation, completely oblivious to the fact that his digital signature had already doomed him to federal prosecution. He squeezed my fingers, whispering that I looked incredibly beautiful. I did not squeeze back. I simply let my hands rest passively in his, maintaining my perfectly pleasant facade. Then I shifted my gaze slightly to the left, looking directly at the woman standing just inches behind his shoulder. Kendra was aggressively hovering in her position as his designated best woman. She was wearing the stark white lace wedding gown, the one she claimed was a tailoring mistake. She stood with her shoulders pulled back, her chest pushed forward deliberately, trying to steal the visual focus of the altar. She looked exactly like a bride, attempting to assert her ultimate psychological dominance over the ceremony. Her lips were curled into a deep, smug smirk that radiated pure, toxic triumph. She truly believed she had won the psychological war. She believed she had successfully humiliated me on my wedding day, forcing me to stand at the altar next to a woman wearing a white bridal gown, while my future husband cowardly permitted the disrespect. To my right stood Terrence and Chloe. Chloe was wearing a pale champagne dress that bordered dangerously on silver, leaning against her husband, with an expression of intense, arrogant satisfaction. She caught my eye and gave a small, victorious tilt of her head. She was mentally counting the hours until Monday morning when she and Kendra planned to execute the final wire transfers and drain the last remaining drops of liquidity from the logistics company trust. They were all standing there performing their respective roles in this grand illusion, perfectly confident in their absolute supremacy. They thought I was a spineless, accommodating casualty who had simply surrendered to their toxic hierarchy. They thought my silence was submission. They did not understand that my silence was the quiet hum of a fully armed digital execution. The minister, a distinguished older gentleman with a deep, booming voice, stepped up to the podium and raised his hands to quiet the room. The soft music faded into absolute silence. The 200 wealthy, influential guests took their seats, rustling their expensive fabrics and settling in for the traditional proceedings. Dearly beloved, the minister began, his voice echoing cleanly through the state-of-the-art sound system. I had personally approved during the venue acquisition process. We are gathered here today in the presence of God and this beautiful company to join Andre and Maya in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred, profound institution built on the foundations of absolute trust, unwavering honesty, and complete transparency. I kept my eyes fixed forward, listening to the heavy, blistering irony of the minister's words. Absolute trust, unwavering honesty, complete transparency. I could feel Kendra's white lace gown brushing against the train of my own dress as she intentionally crowded my physical space. I could feel Andre's clammy hands trembling slightly as he prepared to deliver vows he had no intention of truly honoring. He was standing there ready to promise me a lifetime of devotion while actively plunging my future into a catastrophic federal fraud investigation. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp air of the grand ballroom. I let the absolute power of the moment wash over my entire body. I had spent 35 years building my life from the ground up, protecting my peace, and securing my independence in a world that constantly tried to diminish my worth. I had spent the last several months meticulously auditing, unraveling, and legally purchasing the destruction of the people trying to break me. Every single digital lock was engaged. Every financial trap was primed. Every piece of federal evidence was securely transmitted and received by the authorities waiting in the wings. I stood tall, relaxing my shoulders and looking out at the sea of expectant faces. The elite guests stared back at me, waiting for the romantic spectacle to unfold. The minister continued speaking, moving steadily through the traditional opening remarks of the ceremony, preparing the congregation for the exchange of vows. I knew exactly what was coming next. I knew exactly what Kendra and Chloe had planned for this specific moment to deliver their final public blow to my dignity. I waited with the icy, calculated patience of a woman who already controls the entire battlefield. I listened closely as the minister paused, taking a breath to deliver the most critical and universally recognized question of the entire wedding ceremony. The traditional moment of objection was finally here. The minister let the silence hang in the grand ballroom, allowing the gravity of his upcoming words to settle over the 200 guests. He looked out at the congregation, his deep voice carrying a solemn weight. If anyone here knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause is usually a mere formality, a brief second of quiet before the ceremony proceeds. But today it was the cue for the performance they had been planning for months. Before the minister could even take his next breath, the heavy rustle of white lace broke the silence. Kendra stepped aggressively forward from her position behind Andre. She did not just raise her hand. She marched directly to the center of the altar, placing herself physically between Andre and me. The guests murmured in confusion, staring at the woman wearing a literal bridal gown interrupting a high society wedding. "I object," Kendra announced, her voice amplified by the lapel microphone she had demanded to wear as the best woman. She turned to face the audience, throwing her shoulders back with absolute righteous indignation. "I object because this woman does not belong in our family. She is a fraud. She is a manipulator. And most importantly, she is nothing but a gold digger trying to steal a legacy she did not build." Gasps rippled through the pews. The elite members of Atlanta society clutched their pearls and leaned forward, captivated by the sudden scandal unfolding before their very eyes. These were individuals who built their own fortunes, who understood the severe gravity of corporate malfeasance. They recognized the exact legal formatting of the documents they were about to see. I glanced at Valerie sitting in the front row. She pressed her hands to her mouth, feigning absolute shock, but her eyes were glittering with triumphant satisfaction. She had known this was coming. Chloe stood to my right, practically vibrating with arrogant glee, her champagne-colored dress shimmering under the altar lights, as she waited for my ultimate public destruction. And Andre, the man I had once loved, the man who was supposed to protect me, just stood there. He looked at Kendra with wide, panicked eyes, but he did not tell her to stop. He did not ask her to step down. He simply lowered his head, staring at the hardwood floor, completely surrendering his spine to the woman who controlled his life. He was letting her publicly humiliate me exactly as they had planned. Kendra turned back to face me, a vicious, triumphant smirk plastered across her heavily contoured face. "You thought you could just walk in here and take him?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "You thought you could use your little accounting firm to secure a billionaire lifestyle. But I know who you really are. Maya, you are just a desperate woman trying to lock down a meal ticket. I promised I would always protect Andre from parasites like you, and I am keeping that promise today." She stood there breathing heavily, waiting for me to crack. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to scream or run out of the ballroom in tears, validating their narrative that I was an unstable, aggressive outsider who could not handle the pressure of their elite world. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at Kendra, then at Chloe, then down at the spineless coward staring at his shoes. I let a slow, warm, and utterly terrifying smile spread across my face. "You are absolutely right, Kendra," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely level, echoing through my own hidden microphone. "Protecting this family from parasites is exactly what needs to be done today. But you are terribly confused about who the actual parasite is." I raised my right hand into the air and snapped my fingers. The sharp, crisp sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. I had paid the venue's audiovisual technician an incredible amount of money to follow my exact cues. The instant my fingers snapped, the romantic ambient lighting in the ballroom completely blacked out. The massive digital projector screens suspended behind the altar, the ones Chloe and Kendra had planned to use for another slideshow, mocking me, suddenly flashed to brilliant, blinding life. But there were no childhood photos of Andre and Kendra on the screens today. There were no vacation pictures or romantic montages. The screens illuminated the dark ballroom with high-definition, perfectly organized forensic financial evidence. The first slide was a massive blown-up image of the $30 million shadow loan agreement. The predatory interest rates and the brutal default clauses were highlighted in bright neon yellow for the entire congregation to read. Right next to the loan terms was a crystal-clear image of Andres' digital signature, authorizing the collateralization of his grandfather's entire logistics empire. "What is this?" Valerie gasped, standing up from her front row seat, her face draining of color as she stared at the screen. "What are these documents?" The slides shifted, moving with a steady, relentless rhythm. The next image displayed the registration documents for KC Global Consulting, the Delaware holding company created by Kendra and Chloe. The names of the two women were circled in bold red ink. Right beside their corporate registration, the screens displayed the fraudulent vendor invoices they had been generating for Phantom International Marketing Services. The 200 wealthy, influential guests began to realize exactly what they were looking at. The whispers in the pews escalated into shocked, horrified murmurs. They were watching a live, real-time presentation of massive corporate embezzlement. I turned to face the audience, projecting my voice clearly. "What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is the systematic bleeding of a generational legacy," I announced. "You are looking at $30 million in toxic debt taken out against the family business. But more importantly, you are looking at exactly where that money went." The screens shifted again. This time they displayed the raw offshore wire transfer logs. The bold red arrows traced the funds flowing directly from the logistics company trust account straight into KC Global Consulting and then immediately out to private unregulated bank accounts located in the Cayman Islands. Chloe let out a sharp, terrified gasp, taking a staggering step backward. Her arrogant smirk had completely vanished, replaced by the stark, undeniable panic of a criminal caught red-handed. Kendra stared up at the massive screens, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as her entire manufactured reality crumbled into dust. The final slide locked onto the screen. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the official notification from the private equity firm confirming the catastrophic default of the $30 million shadow loan. On the right was the federal indictment referral I had submitted to the Financial Crimes Division, showcasing Andre's authorization logs for the illegal wire transfers. Andre finally looked up from the floor. He turned around to face the glowing digital screens. I watched the exact second his soul left his body. His knees physically buckled, and he had to grab the wooden altar rail to keep from collapsing. He stared at the offshore transfer logs, staring at the millions of dollars routed to the Cayman Islands. He had signed those authorizations thinking he was paying legitimate consulting fees. He had trusted his lifelong best friend with the keys to his kingdom, and she had locked him outside while burning it to the ground. He was completely irredeemably bankrupt. His grandfather's company was gone. His legacy was liquidated. And because of the ironclad prenuptial agreement he had begged me to sign just days ago, he was going to face the federal fraud investigation entirely alone. Terrence, who had been standing frozen to my right, slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The screens above us were explicitly broadcasting Chloe's name next to the Cayman Island routing numbers. Terrence was the head of marketing for the family business. He knew exactly what those accounts meant. He realized in real time that the woman he slept next to every night had been actively stealing his own inheritance to fund her designer handbags and luxury vacations. Chloe Terrence whispered, his voice cracking with absolute devastation. "You stole from us. You stole from my mother." "Terrence, baby, please," Chloe stammered, reaching out with trembling hands to grab his arm. "I can explain. It is not what it looks like. Kendra told me to do it. It was Kendra's idea." Terrence looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. He ripped his arm away from her grasp as if her touch was physically burning his skin. He dropped her hand, taking 3 large steps away from her, effectively abandoning her on the altar. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream, covering her face as the entire congregation stared at her in horrified judgment. Valerie fell back into her front row chair, clutching her chest as she stared at the documentation of her absolute financial ruin. Her perfect high society life, her pristine reputation, her entire empire was completely eradicated. The powerful guests she had invited to witness her triumph were instead witnessing her complete public destruction. Kendra stood frozen in her ridiculous white wedding gown, trembling violently under the harsh glare of the projector screens. The golden best friend, the untouchable matriarch of the social circle, was exposed as nothing more than a common parasitic thief. I stood in the center of the chaos, perfectly still, perfectly calm, breathing in the sweet, undeniable scent of absolute justice. The emerald accents in my jewelry caught the ambient light from the screens, projecting an aura of total control. I had not shed a tear. I had not raised my voice in anger. I had simply let the raw, undeniable data speak for itself. The trap had sprung. The execution was flawless. I looked out at the gasping, horrified audience and prepared to deliver the final killing blow. The massive digital screens continued to cast their harsh, bright glow over the frozen congregation. The silence that followed the initial wave of gasps was heavier than lead. The elite guests of Atlanta society sat paralyzed in their mahogany chairs, watching the undeniable proof of a corporate empire collapsing in real time. Powerful business executives and generational wealth holders squinted at the high-definition displays, reading the exact routing numbers and the predatory shadow loan terms that had just liquidated the logistics dynasty. They were no longer wedding guests. They were witnesses to the most brutal financial execution this city had ever seen. They watched in absolute disbelief as the numbers laid out a story of profound generational betrayal and pure, unrestrained greed. The minister stood at the podium, looking completely bewildered. He glanced at the screens, then at Andre, then at me. His hands trembled as he gripped his leather binder containing our wedding vows. He cleared his throat, trying to find some semblance of order in a situation that had entirely left his control. He looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes, waiting for some sort of explanation or cue to continue the sacred proceedings. I turned to face the minister, my voice echoing cleanly through the hidden lapel microphone clipped to my bodice. "I believe you asked a question a few moments ago." I said, my tone steady and completely devoid of fear. "You asked if anyone objected to this union, but you also asked me if I would take this man to be my lawfully wedded husband." I turned my body slowly to look directly into Andres' tear-filled, panicked eyes. "I do not," I stated clearly and loudly. "I do not take on toxic debt, and I certainly do not marry cowardly liabilities." Valerie scrambled out of her front row seat. The immaculate silver designer suit she wore suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation and unhinged rage. "You cannot do this!" Valerie screamed, her voice cracking under the terrifying weight of her sudden bankruptcy. "You are ruining our family. You fabricated these documents. I am calling the country club board of directors right now. I will have you thrown out of this building, and I will sue you for every single penny your little accounting firm is worth." I turned my attention to the hysterical matriarch standing below the altar. "You are more than welcome to call the board of directors," Valerie, I replied, maintaining my unshakable composure. "But they no longer have any authority here." By the way, my anonymous holding company formally acquired the commercial deed to this entire property yesterday afternoon. I own this grand ballroom. I own the manicured golf course outside. I own the very ground you are currently standing on. And as the legal owner of this venue, I am officially declaring you and your entire fraudulent family as hostile trespassers. The collective gasp from the audience was absolutely deafening. Valerie staggered backward, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She collapsed into her mahogany chair, staring blankly at the floor as the reality of her new, impoverished existence finally broke through her arrogance. She had no home. She had no company. She had no status. To my right, Chloe dropped to her knees on the altar, sobbing uncontrollably as she grabbed at Terrence's pant leg. The champagne-colored dress she wore pooled around her like dirty water. "Terrence, please," she begged, her voice echoing pathetic and shrill through the silent room. "It was just a temporary loan. We were going to put the money back. I swear Kendra told me it was foolproof. She said your family had too much money to even notice it was missing." Terrence looked down at the white woman he had brought into his family, the woman who had just robbed his mother and his brother blind. He kicked his leg free from her grasp, stepping backward down the altar stairs to distance himself from her toxic presence. "Do not ever speak to me again," Terrence said, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating with pure disgust. "You are absolutely dead to me, Chloe. I will see you in federal court." Andre was still clutching the wooden altar rail, struggling to breathe. His chest heaved with massive panic attacks. "Maya, please," he choked out, tears streaming down his face and ruining his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "We can fix this. I will send her away. I will cut Kendra out of my life today. I will do whatever you want. Please do not leave me alone with this mess." I looked at the man who had allowed his best friend to pull my hair in a restaurant just months prior. I looked at the man who had tried to trick me into signing away my own wealth to cover his crimes through a predatory prenuptial agreement. "You are not my mess to clean up, Andre," I said softly, leaning in close so he could hear the absolute finality in my words. "You dug your own grave when you decided to protect a parasite over your partner. Now you get to lie in it." Kendra finally snapped. The realization that she was completely exposed, that her luxury penthouse was gone, and that her golden ticket was facing decades in federal prison, completely broke her fragile, arrogant mind. The illusion of her high society influencer lifestyle was shattered into a million pieces. She let out a guttural, animalistic scream, tearing at the white lace wedding gown she had so proudly worn to mock me. "You ruined my life!" Kendra shrieked, her eyes wide with blind, feral rage. Her carefully styled hair whipped wildly around her face as she lost all connection to reality. She lunged forward across the altar, her hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. She intended to tear me apart in front of the entire congregation, just like she had done at the restaurant. She wanted to drag me down to the floor one last time. I did not move a single muscle. I did not flinch. I did not step backward. I did not need to. Before Kendra could even close half the distance between us, a solid wall of black suited muscle intercepted her. The private security team I had hired explicitly for this exact moment stepped seamlessly out from behind the massive white floral arrangements. Two massive security guards grabbed Kendra by the arms, lifting her completely off her feet as she thrashed and kicked in her white gown. She screamed obscenities, struggling uselessly against their iron grip. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. A team of 6 federal agents walked briskly down the white aisle, wearing dark suits and tactical gear. They moved with absolute precision, ignoring the shocked stares of the wealthy guests. They flashed their federal badges, moving straight toward the altar. The lead agent walked up the velvet steps, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Chloe and Kendra," he announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, shutting down Kendra's hysterical screaming. "You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Chloe wailed loudly, pressing her face into the floor as an agent pulled her arms behind her back and secured the metal cuffs around her wrists. Kendra stopped thrashing, her eyes widening in pure horror as the cold steel locked around her own wrists. The reality of a federal prison sentence crashed over her, silencing her completely. I stood perfectly still, watching the authorities march the two weeping women down the very aisle I had just walked. They paraded them past the 200 elite guests, who were now actively recording the arrests on their cell phones. The high society event of the season had transformed into the ultimate criminal perp walk. I looked back at Andre, who had collapsed onto the altar steps, burying his face in his hands as he wept uncontrollably. His entire life was over. His legacy was gone. His best friend was in federal custody, and the woman he thought he could use as a financial shield was currently looking down at him with the cold, calculating eyes of a triumphant queen. The sheer perfection of the moment washed over my entire being. I had protected my peace and secured my hard-earned wealth against people who believed my kindness was a weakness. They severely underestimated the quiet intelligence of an African-American woman who built her own empire. I turned my back on the weeping coward on the floor, taking a deep, triumphant breath of victory. The battlefield belonged entirely to me. The federal agents moved with swift mechanical precision, reading the Miranda rights in a flat monotone that echoed through the grand ballroom. The elite guests of Atlanta society stood in stunned silence, holding their breath as they watched the mighty fall. Chloe was weeping uncontrollably, her designer gown pooling on the floor as she tried to crawl toward her husband. She begged Terrence to look at her to help her to call his lawyers. Terrence stood perfectly rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked down at the woman he had brought into our culture, the woman who had smiled in his face while actively robbing his family blind. He did not reach down to help her up. Instead, he stepped back and told her with absolute finality that he was filing for divorce the moment he left the building. He told her she was a parasite and that he would personally testify against her in federal court. The agents hauled Chloe to her feet, marching her down the aisle alongside a completely catatonic Kendra. The golden best friend looked utterly hollowed out, her manufactured influencer facade shattered into a million irredeemable pieces. She was walking to a federal holding cell wearing a white lace wedding gown. With the architects of his destruction removed from the room, Andre was left completely alone on the altar platform. He fell heavily to his knees, the expensive fabric of his tailored tuxedo tearing slightly against the polished wood. He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. He begged me to stay. He pleaded for my forgiveness, swearing that he had been manipulated and that he never meant to hurt me. He cried out that he loved me, that I was the only real thing in his life, and that we could rebuild everything together. He reached out with trembling hands, trying to grasp the hem of my emerald gown. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, ensuring he could not touch me. I looked down at the pathetic, broken shell of a man who had chosen to sacrifice his generational wealth and my dignity to appease a toxic friendship. I reached for my left hand and slid the heavy $15,000 diamond engagement ring off my finger. I held it out and dropped it perfectly into his trembling, open palms. I told him he should probably keep that. I told him he was going to need every single penny he could find to pay the retainer for his federal defense attorney. I turned my back on him and walked out of the ballroom, leaving him weeping on the floor of the venue I now legally owned. 6 months passed, bringing the crisp, cool air of a Georgia autumn and a profound sense of absolute peace. The dust from the catastrophic collapse of Andres' family empire had finally settled, and the landscape of my life was beautifully clear. My forensic wealth management firm was booming. The high-profile exposure from the wedding incident had brought a flood of new elite clientele to my door. Powerful executives and massive corporations wanted the woman who could single-handedly dismantle a $30 million fraud operation without breaking a sweat. I was busier than I had ever been, but it was a joyful, purposeful kind of busy. I had completely restructured the assets I acquired from the logistics company Default. I systematically liquidated the commercial real estate, the shipping fleets, and the vast warehouse portfolios. I took those millions of dollars and established a massive, irrevocable trust fund. But unlike the trust fund Andre and Valerie had so carelessly destroyed, this one had a very specific purpose. I created a comprehensive scholarship foundation dedicated exclusively to funding the education of brilliant young Black women entering the fields of finance and forensic accounting. I wanted to build an army of women who knew exactly how to read the numbers, who knew how to protect their wealth, and who would never let anyone gaslight them into submission. It was a Friday evening, and I was standing on the expansive glass balcony of my new luxury high-rise condominium in Midtown Atlanta. The city lights sparkled below me, a sea of endless possibilities. I held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, taking a slow, deliberate sip as the cool wind washed over my face. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors behind me, my television was playing the local evening news. The anchor was detailing the latest developments in the most sensational financial crimes case the city had seen in decades. The federal indictments had officially come down. Kendra and Chloe were facing up to 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The broadcast showed sketch artist drawings of the two women sitting in a federal courtroom looking exhausted and utterly defeated. The news anchor then pivoted to the ongoing criminal investigation into Andre, who was currently out on bail, but facing a mountain of insurmountable evidence regarding his complicity in the fraudulent offshore transfers. His public ruin was absolute and entirely of his own making. Valerie was living in a modest rented apartment, completely ostracized from the high society circles she had once ruled with such arrogance. I leaned against the cool metal railing of my balcony, letting the distant sounds of the city traffic anchor me in the present moment. I thought about the woman who had walked into that Michelin-starred restaurant all those months ago. I thought about how hard I had tried to shrink myself to fit into their toxic hierarchy. I had been willing to overlook the microaggressions, the subtle disrespect, and the blatant hostility just to maintain the illusion of a happy relationship. They had looked at my quiet demeanor and mistaken it for weakness. They saw a successful, independent African-American woman and decided I was nothing more than a convenient shield for their massive financial crimes. They believed they could break my spirit, pull my hair in public, and demand my apologies while stealing millions of dollars right under my nose. They severely underestimated the calculating patience of a woman who built her own table when they refused to give her a seat. Liquidating their generational wealth had been the most satisfying professional endeavor of my entire career. I remembered signing the final transfer documents for the country club deed, effectively converting their precious exclusive sanctuary into a public asset. I sold the clubhouse and the manicured golf course to a progressive real estate developer who immediately transformed the property into an inclusive community center. Every time Valerie drove past her former elite country club, she would have to see everyday working families enjoying the grounds she had once aggressively gatekept. It was poetic justice served on a silver platter. The logistics company assets were dismantled with similar ruthless efficiency. The massive fleet of commercial trucks was auctioned off to various independent contractors, giving small business owners the opportunity to expand their own operations. The millions of dollars generated from these liquidations went directly into the scholarship foundation. I had already awarded full-ride tuition packages to 50 talented young women. I looked at their application essays and saw the same fire and determination that had fueled my own journey. I was taking the stolen wealth of a toxic dynasty and planting it firmly into the future of my community. The federal trial for Kendra and Chloe was scheduled to begin next month, and the prosecutors had already informed my legal team that they had a bulletproof case. They had tried to turn on each other during the interrogation process. Chloe claimed Kendra manipulated her into setting up the Delaware holding company, while Kendra insisted Chloe was the mastermind behind the offshore Cayman Island accounts. Their lifelong golden friendship had instantly evaporated the second the federal handcuffs clicked into place. There is absolutely no loyalty among parasites when the host finally dies. Andre was reportedly working with a public defender, having exhausted whatever meager funds he had left on his initial bail arrangements. He had tried to reach out to me several times, sending pathetic emails begging for a character reference or a small loan to help cover his legal fees. I routed every single message directly to a blocked folder without ever reading past the subject line. He was a closed chapter, a liability I had successfully audited out of my life. I thought about the young women who would benefit from the foundation. Women who looked like me, who worked twice as hard to get half as far in the corporate world. Providing them with the financial backing to pursue their dreams without the burden of student debt was the ultimate victory. I was changing lives with the very money that was supposed to be hidden away in offshore accounts. The generational wealth that was meant to fund Chloe's designer handbags and Kendra's fake influencer lifestyle was now paying for textbooks, housing, and tuition for the next generation of Black female executives. They had tried to leave me with absolutely nothing, but in the end, I had turned their greed into a mechanism for profound social good. I took another sip of my champagne, savoring the crisp, sweet taste. I looked down at my left hand where the heavy diamond ring used to sit. My finger was bare, but I had never felt more beautifully adorned. I did not need a ring to prove my worth, and I certainly did not need a prestigious family name to validate my existence. I had walked through the fire of their betrayal and emerged completely unscathed. The greatest asset I possessed was never the $30 million in toxic debt I recovered. It was not the real estate deeds or the successful accounting firm. My absolute greatest asset was my unshakable self-respect. I had refused to compromise my dignity for a man who would not protect me. I had refused to let a jealous friend and a greedy sister-in-law dictate my narrative. If you are watching this and you have ever found yourself shrinking to fit into spaces where you are not valued, please hear me clearly. Do not ever let anyone convince you that your boundaries are a burden. Do not let toxic people weaponize your love against you. When they show you who they really are, you must believe them immediately. And when the time comes to walk away, make sure you take all your power with you. The best revenge is not destruction. It is simply elevating yourself to a level they can never reach. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your peace is the ultimate wealth.